Hey guys, Dark Humility here. You can always catch me at twitch.tv/Dark Humility for 6 to 7 days a week of Diablo 2 action, PD2, D2R. First, we'll also be checking out the next ladder for D2R shortly and Diablo 4 when we are actually able to play the game. You can check out the rest of my guides here on YouTube for PD2 and D2R and our elite written guides for D2R at maxroll.gg. Today, we have the last installment in my Season 6 PD2 guide series. This is going to be a full build guide, not just the demo that we released earlier in the season for the Rabies Druid. The Rabies Druid is perhaps one of the most important and most impactful builds in Season 6, so it's very important that indeed we get a very solid guide out there so that people understand how to make this build as effective and as ridiculous as possible. Some may call it OP, but even if it is nerfed in future seasons, it is still likely to be a force even in the future. It's always been steadily powerful. Even in Season 5, it was fairly strong, but with the new quality of life added to its already enormous damage in terms of spread capability and speed and things of that nature, it is a monstrous build capable of clearing at some of the very fastest times. This is indeed an S tier map clearing build with late game gear. And we will be, of course, making this guide here on Hardcore Ladder Live on PD2. So this is my Hardcore Rabies Druid Hydrophobia, level 93. We're going over the stats, the skills, the gear, and of course we'll be doing demos as well at the end, and we'll do that in that order. We'll have timestamps, or we will have chapters below so you guys can navigate any part of the video you want to learn more about when it comes to this beast. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the meat of the Rabies Druid. Rabies Druid is definitely one of the most powerful and most fun builds of Season 6. So I hope you enjoy. Alright, so strength, you just want enough strength to wear your gear. Physical damage is not very significant. You can increase your amount of strength if you want, for like 1 point fury or something with certain weapon options, but it's not very important. Next thing you're going to want is as much negative enemy poison resistance as possible in addition to damage. As you can see, this Rabies Druid is a very strong Rabies Druid with crazy damage values. Of course, could be even higher potentially, but it's very hard to get it stronger than that. Next thing you're going to want to do is make sure you have enough attack rating. Having about 10,000 attack rating with both Feral Rage and Rabies is good in maps. As you can see, we well exceed that. No problem. Usually you're not going to have much of a problem with attack rating on this build because you're going to want to put enough dexterity in to get maximum block. Which you can see here, chance to block 75%. This is a block build for sure. There's absolutely no reason pretty much ever to not have block on this build. It is insanely strong with the one-handed weapon choices, which tend to be the very best weapon choices on this druid. So you're going to definitely want to get maximum block, softcore or hardcore in almost every case. And when you put enough dex points in to get maximum block, which depends on your level, how many dex points you will need. The higher level, of course, the more dex points you'll actually have to have. But at any rate, it is definitely important to get that maximum block, and you'll have plenty of AR to go along with it once again. The rest of the points you put are into vitality and nothing into energy. Pretty simple there. And then of course we have here a bunch of resistances. So you're going to want maximum res with one of the most strongest and popular options for this particular build. you will definitely get some more maximum resistances as well. So you get that 4% maximum cold res with the Bramble. And of course, there's maximum fire res coming from here as well, and maximum poison res from here as well. You don't necessarily need those, but they do make you really, really tanky to have all that extra resistance for sure. Keep in mind, this is on hardcore, so we are going to make sure we want at least some stacked res. The stacked res also helps to shore up not just against lower resistant conviction, but also up against negative resistance stat on the maps themselves. So it's very important we have a lot of res. As a matter of fact, if you wanted to sacrifice some more damage on this setup, you can stack your res even higher. There's also ways to get your res even higher than that, and we'll discuss those once we go over the gear. Damage reduction is very important. You're going to take a lot of damage on this build, a lot of physical damage, not just elemental damage. You're running up to the monsters and tagging them. It's a game of tag. You're trying to tag the groups of monsters as fast and as smoothly as possible. And so, because you have to run up to them, you're going to take a lot of damage in the process as you weave in between the monsters. I do recommend having decent damage reduction, at least a decent amount on softcore, so that you're not constantly dying. And on hardcore, you're going to want maximum or near maximum, 45% plus, definitely, if you can achieve it. Here we have 49% plus, so as you can see, solid stuff. Very good. And of course you also have flat MDR and DR from being a werewolf, so the werewolf form itself, you also benefit a bit from that and get a bit more survivability. Hit recovery. It's not absolutely necessary because you have max block that you have tons of hit recovery, but you do get hit a lot. This build hits 86% hit recovery in wolf form, which is a very good breakpoint, meaning that if we do take a ton of damage, it's not really going to set us back very much at all. He's got pretty good breakpoints for that. We also have 86% block rate, which is even more important. Block rate is going to increase how fast we recover from a block animation as we are blocking. You're going to block a lot on this build because you're going to be running and interweaving between monsters quite frequently. So this one's a bit more important. You don't need this much block rate. You can definitely make do with 48%, which is the breakpoint below in wolf form. However, this ensures even more smooth transitions between the monsters. Run walk is a very good stat on this character, however you don't necessarily need all that much on your gear, and we'll explain why. You can get more, of course, with different setups. And then, of course, Life Leech is very good to have. Definitely going to be hitting the monsters with Feral Rage and Rabies, so the Life Leech will help with your sustain a bit. I would say life per kill, though, is even more instrumental to your overall sustain on this build as opposed to Life Leech. You're also going to want either Mana Leech or Mana per kill. In my case, I have Mana per kill here on Jalal's main. 5 is probably the bare minimum, so that's going to be pretty good stuff. Having a bit of Mana Leech can also be effective, though. However, you don't need it if you have mana per kill. It's not super important. You'll sustain just fine. None of the other stats are super important. Most of your damage, once again, is poison. Once again, though, if you want to use Fury with Grief and you want to do a decent amount of physical damage, some of these other stats can be important, especially if you're hybridizing and trying to make yourself more effective against single targets. Magic Find, though, just how much Magic Find you can stack. We have alternative gear that I'll show off that can get our MF very comfortably to, our base MF comfortably to about 150, which is actually very nice if you're trying to focus more on Magic Find. This current setup, though, is all about damage and sustain, and really showing off what the Rabies Druid is truly capable of here. Alright, so that's pretty much it. I mean, that's pretty much all you really have to worry about on this setup. Another stat you might want to worry about is on bow, and when you're casting your animals and things of that nature. You might want to make sure that you're at least hitting the 26 or maybe even the 40 FCR breakpoint so you can more quickly get all of your summons on the field, including the necessary ones of the oak, the creepers, and of course bow itself. So if you just want a bit more quality of life there. But FCR is not used for the rest of this build in any way, shape, or form. Alright, so of course that is all very, very good stuff. So those are the stats. Let's now go over the skills. So the skills we have here. Skills are pretty simple in this build. Just put 1 point to summon Grizzly. You can put more points in there if your Grizzly's dying too fast and you don't have a very high level of gear. Oak Sage, you're going to want to max that out, of course, as well. But you're going to max that last. So what you really want to pay attention to is maxing out Poison Creeper, which is not just a synergy for Rabies, but having them out reduces enemy poison res by, as you can see at this level, negative 35. Maxed out Poison Creeper is pretty nuts. It is a synergy for Rabies. Of course, you're going to max Rabies itself. You're going to max Lycanthropy as well. Once again, it's not just a synergy for Lycanthropy, it also helps out with your life and your attack rating significantly. You only need to put 1 point to Werewolf on this build because, once again, your physical damage is not the primary focus. You definitely can put more points in if you want some more flat reduction, but it really isn't important whatsoever. As you can see, we have level 46 Rabies with all of our plus skills. Of course, we're also using percent damage large charms, so overall we're hitting just almost about 50. You can get it even higher though, and more damage is possible. Believe it or not, it's actually possible to get 100,000 Rabies damage on this build, roughly speaking, so it's actually kind of nuts. You can have even more damage. However, as you will see with the demos, not super important unless you're doing purely group maps, but in order to get those plus skills, you're going to have to sacrifice survivability, so I would even argue that this amount of damage is pretty much peak Rabies form in a lot of ways. I also put 1 point to Fury. This is nice to use in between Rabies bites on your other one so that you can do some physical damage and you can more effectively leech single targets. That's all I do there, and of course you max out Feral Rage as well because it is a synergy for Rabies. It's also a synergy for Fury, so it also makes 1 point Fury more effective as well, interestingly enough. And of course, with all of the synergies, it's going to be very powerful. Feral Rage is also going to give us a pretty solid amount of lifesteal and run walk speed, which is really the important stats on this particular one, so we're also going to be using that. So interesting thing is Rabies is a very efficient build. All of the synergies also help in other ways. They're not just damage synergies, to make it incredibly effective. Now you can also put 1 point to Gust if you want to use Gust out of Werewolf form, maybe to get over to cross a river or to cross a lava or a chasm or something. Every once in a while you can untransform into werewolf, use Gust, and then retransform. Most of the time though, you don't need to use this. It's not going to be effective. Your mobility is all your run walk, which is insane, with your use of Feral Rage, fast run walk on your gear, and the Vigor Aura from your Mercenary if you're using this particular Mercenary approach. And you never really feel like you will ever need Gust for mobility whatsoever on this particular build. So I don't get it at all. I don't waste any points. I make sure that the rest of our points are going into Oak Sage, and in 4 more levels, I believe. So at level 97, Oak Sage would be maxed out. At that point, if you really wanted to, you could put like 1 point to Carrion Wine, Solar Creeper. You could even like leave out a point Oak Sage and get Gust if you want. Maybe even use Cyclone Arbor here and there just to buff up your ability to deal with certain elemental monsters. Definitely some possibilities. Of course, if you want to leave some off of Oak Sage, you could also put one into Hurricane if you want. You can maybe help a tiny bit. Really won't do much though, because it won't have a lot of damage. It'll mostly just look cool when you're using it in werewolf form. At any rate, those are pretty much all the options, but the real key takeaways are max rabies, max synergies, 1 point fury, 1 point werewolf, and then the rest of the points go into Oak Sage after putting 1 point into Summon Grizzly as well. And that is a very solid build at that point. You could also put your points into Heart of the Wolverine if you really wanted to hybridize Fury Rabies, and you could make your 1 point Fury even more effective as well. However, then your HP is significantly lower. I do just recommend going HP, even on softcore, because this build is going to be taking a lot of damage, and you're really going to want to be able to face tank incredible amounts of damage, whether it is here on hardcore or softcore mode. All right, and now for the Mercenary. There are a few different options for the Mercenary. The Mercenary, because it's a poison build, and it doesn't always proc anyway like the lower resist, there's really a lot of potential things you can do with the Mercenary on this build. You can have a defensive option that uses Zenith, which is a weapon that will provide you with Salvation Aura and give you all resistances. You can stack your resistances to the moon, and you can go pure defensive. This is not a pure defensive approach, but you can do that on an Act 2 Mercenary using Defiance Aura fairly effectively. You can also, of course, use Plague with Defiance Aura on an Act 2 Mercenary as well, and get the lower res proc that way, and also provide even more defensive. So there's definitely a lot of more defensive approaches. Now you might be wondering on hardcore, why am I not going the most defensive approaches? Because I don't really feel it's necessary. As you can see with our DR and our HP and the fact that we have maximum block, we're very tanky. The only thing we really don't have with the more defensive approaches is more stacked res and defense. So we could be tankier, but this amount of HP is already pretty insane. As you might remember from some of my previous Season 6 guides on the Barbarian, on our max block Warcry Barb, we had a lot of defense, but we actually had 400 less HP. So, all in all, it ends up being fairly similar overall survivability. And that's plenty, even for hardcore. Of course, you can argue either way. And of course, if you want to survive things like Conviction Souls, you can stack your res even more. You can focus more on Sorbs. But that's just how it's going to be. What we're going to go over now, though, is my particular approach on the Mercenary, which I think is hands down the best approach, even on a budget. I think this is going to get you the very farthest, which is Pus Spitter. We did upgrade it into a Gorgon crossbow using the Pol Lum Perfect Emerald recipe. We upgraded everything here, including this as well, and this as well, using the Lemco Perfect Diamond armor upgrade recipes for maximum defense and damage. Of course, this is pretty straightforward. So poison damage is not affected by conviction. That's something very important I'd like to get out here. You know, I think when I made the Poison Nova guide maybe like 3 or 4 seasons ago, I talked about this, but it is true. Infinity does not affect poison damage, so that is why we don't have Infinity and why we don't need an Act 2 Mercenary unless we're going a more defensive approach. So poison damage is only affected by negative enemy poison res on your gear, and of course by lower resistance curse, which lowers resist to all elements, including poison, not like Conviction, which is only cold, fire, and lightning. And, of course, also the Poison Creepers, which is a new way to reduce poison resistance, and it's the main reason they're effective. One thing to note about Creepers and Oak Sage, if you don't remember from last season, or if you don't remember it from this season, they are untargetable, so they no longer die, so you don't have to worry about respawning them ever, which is awesome. Because, I mean, you can already lose some extra meat shields anyway, and you might want to respawn them, and you don't have to worry about ever respawning these. It's made this build so much better in Season 6, and so much more effective overall. Okay, so next what we're going to want to do here is talk about the gear. So once again, lower resistance from Pus Spitter. This is the most effective way to get lower resistance. Just want attack speed at this point so that it's proccing lower resist as much as possible. This Razor Tail plus her base Pierce actually gives her 99% projectile Pierce, effectively meaning that with Strafe, she is piercing through all the targets and casting lower resist as much as possible in combination with the attack speed and Life Leech. The faster run walk ensures that she can actually keep up with you because you are incredibly fast yourself. Of course, she's getting more resistance, which is very important, in addition to Life Leech for defensive stats. Definitely want to make sure she at least maximum res, as you can see here in the Mercenary stats. Pressing the 8 button here with the Mercenary open, we see she's even got some stacked resistances as well, which is nice. Her attack speed is also incredibly high, so she's casting Strafe very quickly. The other thing we're going to want to do, though, is talk about damage reduction. So you want that physical damage reduction stat on her. This is how she survives. She's pretty squishy without tons of damage reduction, so I highly recommend that you go 50% damage reduction, or at least 40% on this Mercenary, so she's not constantly dying in maps. Of course, there's plenty of cheaper alternatives. Razor Tail isn't very expensive, and you don't need quite this attack speed and this level of anything. These can just be random corruptions. You can just have Life Leech anywhere on anything in this regard, and it's not a big deal. Of course, on here we just have more attack speed and damage, some cold damage, and some alt resistances to make her even tankier. Overall, though, there's plenty of other options you can use. You can also make her pretty much curse immune, or you can make her curse immune as well using Crown of Ages and Occultist and curse immunity slams on various pieces of gear. I do want to emphasize that there's a lot of different options to giving her this damage reduction, including slams, including things like Tancred's Boots. The only problem with Tancred's Boots is it has no faster run walk. It's a fast run walk, maximum Pierce, Life Leech, maximum DR, huge attack speed, and stacked res are really the most important elements to keeping this Mercenary alive. This particular gear combination accomplishes that extremely well. Alright. So, another reason you might be asking, why are we using an Act 1 Mercenary? The lower resist Dark Humility doesn't even proc all the time, and you kill a lot of the monsters before she even reaches them, especially when solo mapping. Well, there's a couple reasons. So the lower resist is actually effective in solo mapping in some scenarios, especially against bosses. However, it is also way more effective during group mapping sessions, and lower resist is very good for helping all types of elemental damage. Of course, it also is much more important for your own damage, because in Player's 8, you're not going to kill everything instantly, so it's going to make your damage insanely high. The other thing to note is that she is using Vigor Aura, and you can see here, even without Feral Rage, we are pretty darn fast. You can run at lightning speeds here. But you can see here that if we proc Feral Rage, we're now running insanely fast, which is what we want. Because now we can run in between packs and tag your it constantly. And the faster you can do that, the faster you can extend and expand Rabies' deadly spread to absolutely eviscerate maps. This is really, really, truly the key, is being able to run quickly between packs of enemies, infecting all of them, and running around in a way. So, very, very good stuff. I do think Vigor Aura plus Feral Rage, plus any faster run walk you can get on gear, is particularly effective. Alright. Next thing we're going to want to talk about is the gear. The core gear. The most important thing, most likely, and the thing that people are probably most curious about, is how does this work? Well, on your offhand, it's the standard Lidless Wall and Call to Arms. with Battle Command having some effect on the ED of Fury and Feral Rage, but not super important. And of course, we actually got our extra faster cast rate here as a corruption, so we can hit that 26 frame in wolf form for casting everything. You're going to want to cast everything on your offhand because that's where you have your plus skills on this build, and that is the case with most versions of this build. It's also your offhand where you're going to be having a faster cast rate with most build setups. So you're going to want to cast your werewolf in this form, and then you're going to want to start cast because werewolf form has faster cast rate speed, and then you're going to want to cast all of your summons. Like that. And then you bow again. So you bow, battle command, battle orders, transform into a werewolf, cast all your summons, bow again, and then swap back, and you're ready to go. Alright, so let's talk about the gear here. Outside, of course, the weapon swap. So here we have probably the most important piece. We have the Plague Bearer. There are two major weapon options on a Rabies Druid. There's a Plague Bearer, and there's the Grief. It is also possible to use a Plague, the actual rune word, not Plague Bearer, the unique, but Plague, the rune word, which will proc lower resist on being struck, give you Cleansing Aura, which is very nice for making you virtually curse immune, or at least heavily curse resistant, and will make you tankier in other ways as well. So technically there's three weapon options. Plague Bearer I would consider the most defensive of all of them, but not necessarily the highest damage, probably the lowest damage of all of them. Grief is probably going to be your best option in terms of having a very high combination of damage, sustain with really high life per kill, the highest negative enemy res you can get on a weapon, and fast attack speed, meaning fast frames for using rabies and moving in between packs. Of course, we will demo the use of both of these weapons so you guys can see how they both perform. I don't have Plague on this character, but we'll be demoing Plague Bearer and Grief. Plague, though, is very good due to its cleansing, and also the fact that it has pretty solid damage and it has negative enemy res as well. Plague Bearer, though, Plague Bearer is the highest DPS option, period. This is probably what you're going to want to use in almost every case in a group map to maximize your damage, with really, given how high the HP the monsters particularly have. It does so much damage with 4 socket corruption, which is what this has, that you almost don't even need Fury at all. You could kill bosses just by casting Rabies and Feral Rage over and over, in between maybe some Furies as well, as this weapon does do a decent amount of damage. You'll see here with Fury it actually does some damage, and with Feral Rage it also does some damage. So as you can see, even with this weapon it does damage. Now if we put on the Grief, you can see that the average damage is significantly higher. But it's still the case, of course, that this weapon's doing physical damage as well if you upgrade it into a Cryptic Sword using the Pole Lum Perfect Emerald recipe once again. So it is arguable that Plague Bearer is probably the most budget of all these options because it's not too difficult to find any random Plague Bearer. However, if you get a 6 Rabies one with 4 sockets and put 5/5 poison facets in it, it is also the highest DPS weapon for Rabies as well. So this is my main weapon. This is what I use most of the time. However, as you can see, this really well-rolled Grief here can also be extremely effective. Alright, and of course for sustain, like I said, there's a lot of advantages to Grief for sure. Against single targets, it is unrivaled. When you're switching between Fury, Feral Rage, and Rabies as well, and it's overall a very good option. So, Plague Bearer, Grief, and the rune word Plague itself, which can also be put in a Phase Blade. Alright, next up, let's go over the helmet. So the helmet, there's definitely a few different options that come to mind, or at least more than a few different options. You could use Ursa's Nightmare, which is +4 shapeshifting skills. You can use a Cerebus Bite, which is also +4 shapeshifting skills. Cerebus gives Deadly Strike as well, so that's also good for more of a hybrid Fury Rabies approach as well. Jalal's is the most balanced of all of them, though. So Jalal's has up to 4 shapeshifting skills. This one actually rolled that. Plus, can give you a ton of sockets for poison facets, just like the other options can. But it also gives you mana per kill. It gives you a lot of strength, energy, and all resistances. It can be difficult to get enough resistances on this build. So Jalal's overall is a very solid option, especially for hardcore. It's definitely one of the more defensive options. If you want to go curse immune on this build, the best way to do it would probably use Plague, and then on top of maybe a Crown of Ages to further cut the curse duration even more to the point where it's almost non-existent. So you could also use Crown of Ages and Poison Facets as well, but then you're going to have significantly less plus skills. This one is a Puzzle Box 2 sockets with CBF. I'm going to want Cannot Be Frozen somewhere on your build. There are plenty of places you could have it, though. In this case, it's just on my helm in Season 6, because you don't have Cannot Be Frozen on as a slam on rings or on boots anymore. It's actually a pretty solid slam anywhere now, and or even you can use Cham runes to acquire that as well. So overall, it also has hit recovery. It's just overall a very solid helm. Jalal's, this is definitely my favorite choice. It is also possible, besides Cerebus and Ursa's Nightmare, and a few other options as well. You could also use a 5 or 6 Rabies helmet as well if you use a rare or a blue helmet, or even a crafted helmet as well, so if you craft some Druid helmets. So it's definitely possible to get a lot of different types of things. Jalal's is incredibly balanced and powerful, though. Mara's is also very balanced in the same way, and the life per kill is going to help keep our sustain up, especially since we aren't using Grief. So we also have Mara's as well, and Mara's is giving us a lot of our res as well, so it's very important, and plus skills. You could definitely use a 3 or even a 4 shape-shifting amulet if you get the +1 corruption to get even more damage, and probably sacrifice either some sustain or all res and a bunch of things like that. We really need the all res on this build, though, so on my particular setup. So we're not really going to go super hard on the plus skills, but you can definitely get more damage with plus skills instead of Mars. Pretty much just want plus shape-shifting skills, amulets, or especially as many as possible, or Mars on this build. They're pretty much the only things that are going to be useful. One thing to note is this is a shape-shifting build, so you only get your attack speed from your weapon. It's the reason why Grief is faster than this weapon, because it's just a faster base than Cryptic Sword. For the most part, it's just a lot faster. You cannot get attack speed anywhere else on your gear, so using things like High Lords will not be very effective. Alright, and then there's the armor. There's actually a lot of different choices for the armor. Of course, for the amulet, you could use a plain shape-shifting amulet. For the armor, you can use a Venom Ward. Venom Ward is probably the most budget of options, as it is just a unique breastplate, and you can find it practically anywhere, and it has negative enemy poison resist on it. Of course, you could also get 3 sockets in one of those bad boys and have negative 30 poison resist and 15% poison damage as well, which in a lot of ways doesn't quite exceed Bramble, but it definitely rivals it. And against monsters with heavy poison resistance can actually be better, because it has more. Bramble, though, in Season 6 is a sturdy option, though, that only rolls between 40 to 50 now, making it much more easy to get a crap ton of damage rolling Bramble. Which is good, because with lower numbers, the damage would often be very lackluster. So I definitely welcome this change to Bramble. I think Bramble, for most people, is going to be best in slot. But, I definitely, because it also has life per kill on it, it has more sustain, it has the maximum res, it has a lot of all res, it has faster hit recovery. It's just super balanced. Of course, you have a billion poison res on Venom Ward as well, but this is even more balanced in other ways. So, very solid stuff. The Rune Word Venom is also possible to use as well. And it's even possible to use things like Cage of the Ensouled and just put 6 poison facets in it, which arguably is even higher DPS against all kinds of monsters with its huge negative enemy res that it could apply. That is an item that maybe there's like 1 or 2 of on hardcore though, so don't really test with it very often. On softcore it's also pretty rare, but you could do that as well, and it's going to be a very effective item. But the Rathma armor definitely would be decent as well in this situation. Of course, you also are going to want to take a look at the shield. Now, on hardcore, I think it's a no-brainer to use Storm Shield because you're not really going to get damage reduction in many other places on this build unless you're using Crown of Ages. But even then, you're going to have damage reduction elsewhere because you really want to get as close to 50% as possible, because you're going to be taking a ton of damage on this build, running very close up to enemies. So this one's got 2 sockets. We're getting our block rate really big time from this. 86 block rate once again. We're actually getting it from here, here, and this corruption here. Getting 86 once again. You don't need 86. You can go for 48. But the 86 feels incredibly good. Doesn't even feel like we're blocking at all, and we can kind of just move freely between packs, which is awesome. The 5% max on life on here as well is very, very good. It really stacks with Lycanthropy extremely well. Just Jaw Runes and Maximum Life Corruption stack very well with all the extra bonus life you get just by being in werewolf form. So it's very effective stuff. Of course, you can use the plus skill. I even have a plus skill Storm Shield I could use instead if I wanted to and get more damage. There's plenty of things you can do there. I would argue the cheapest option that's fairly effective for a Rabies Druid would be something like Radaman's Sphere, actually. So Radaman's Sphere would provide you with chance to block, so you can get maximum block on it, and 2 poison skills, so you can get a lot of poison skills that way. If you're on softcore or feel like you don't need quite as much DR, you can also go for the plus Druid skills Spirit Ward. That's another very effective option as well. Both Spirit Ward and Radaman's Sphere are very solid options. Radaman's Sphere doesn't have any damage reduction on it though, so it's definitely probably for LOD content only, but you can definitely use it and get more damage. One thing to note is, of course, we put poison facets, it seems, everywhere, but you know, you could even put them in here too if you didn't want the extra block frame or felt like your res was high enough. You got that res at least capped, you know, that's really the key. Alright, so those are pretty much the major options for all those pieces of gear there. Of course, we have the gloves. There's really only 2 gloves you're ever going to want to use on this character because of the percent poison skill damage. So you can get 15% poison skill damage from either Venom Grip or Train Gloves. Train Gloves will give you FCR, which will, you know, help you cast your summons faster, so that's really nice. But it won't give you anything else. This will give you Life Leech, which is a useful stat somewhat. Crushing Blow, which can be somewhat useful against single targets with Fury. And it gives you maximum poison resist. Now, Train Gloves give you cold resist, but Storm Shield, we already have high cold resist. So, honestly, maximum poison res really takes advantage of how crazy high the poison resistance is on this character and how you don't really have to worry about it whatsoever. Of course, the block rate corruption is here to help us reach the 86% block rate breakpoint, and the 15% poison skill damage is key. So Venom Grip is typically the choice on this character, but you can use Train Gloves if you want to cast things faster. And you don't really care as much about the Crushing Blow or the Life Leech or the maximum poison res. Alright. Water Walks is, I personally think, going to be the best option, at least for me, on this particular character. There are other ways to get block rate or block chance, by the way. I mean, you could even use Steel Shade instead of Jalal's, but you're going to be hurting your damage quite a bit. I recommend just using Water Walks. Water Walks gives you Dexter block, it gives you the block rate, it gives you solid fast run walk. It used to give you 40, which is broken. A lot of life, which scales with your percent life off of Lycanthropy and everything else, so it's very nice. Maximum fires for even more tankiness, and life per kill corruption, which is amazing, of course, once again. As you can see, we have that life per kill in these 3 different spots here. It really helps with our sustain. Of course, if we want to, we can get way more life per kill and have even crazier sustain with grief. So that is definitely an option there. So Water Walks, I think, is best in slot. If you want to go a bit more hybrid, you could use like Gore Riders or War Travelers if you want more MF. One thing to note here is in the stash here, we have a bunch of options for swapping out MF. So if you wanted to lower your sustain a bit or your block rate or whatever, you have plenty of Magic Find here. And with all this Magic Find, you'll very easily be able to get much higher Magic Find if that's what you're going for, and you can sacrifice some other stats. Of course, this is where a lot of our other DR is coming from. This DR Corrupted String of Ears is really good. It's helping us get really close to 50%, but if you go with 45%, you can get more MF. Wisp Projector. Now you might wonder, why do we have Wisp Projector if we don't need Heart of the Wolverine and we only want our Oak Sage? Well, that's because of the fact that it is a +1 ring, which is going to increase our damage. It gives us some Magic Find as well, and it gives us Lightning Absorb, so it just makes us a bit tankier all the way around. And all resistance is a nice tank stat. Of course, you could also get Mana Leech on there if you wanted some Mana Sustain and lower Life Leech. There's a bunch of stats that could be useful here. Damage Reduction, Corruption as well. Or even Curse Duration Reduction if you're going for Curse Immune. Of course, BK Ring I also consider to be very solid. If you're going to go for plus skill rings, which I do recommend because it will increase your damage, you can also go for this one. It gives us more Life Leech, Life, and we even have an All Attributes Corruption, making us even tankier. These are definitely the 2 best +1 skill options, and of course you could even go 2 Bolcathos rings if you don't feel like you need the Sorb and the extra MF. Definitely lots that you can do there. Before you get to that point though, where you can even afford these, I would recommend maybe getting stat rings or stat res rings or stat res rings with Leech. That'd be pretty nice. And then you'll be set to go. One thing to note is if you're getting your DR elsewhere instead of String of Ears, you can also use things like Arachnid's Mesh, which can give you more FCR and it gives you another plus skill. You can also use Snake Cord, especially early on. Snake Cord can give you up to 6% poison skill damage, which is like a little mini baby, very tiny bramble that you can have on your belt. So that's another way to further increase your damage, is using something like Snake Cord. And remember, you can upgrade the belt so that you have 4 slots. Snake Cord is pretty nice on PD2 and a very solid option. Alright. And then, of course, your charms, ideally you're going to get Shape-Shifting Skillers and Poison Damage Large Charms. A combination of these is appropriate most of the time. 4% skill damage. If I actually had a bit more of these, I could eke out a couple hundred more damage, which really isn't that important, but I could. Instead, I decided to opt for a combination of the damage and the extra survivability provided by a lot of these shape-shifting skillers, and go for these at the same time to get a very high amount of life. It's very hard to find shape-shifting lifers on hardcore, especially with builds like Fury very frequently being used for Diablo clone. So this is the best I could do, at least this ladder, for doing this. But you can see here we're getting some more FHR there, and it's just life shape-shifting skillers. You could use planes early on. You can just use res, make sure your res is good early on, and life as well. But with this combination of 4% as well, we're also hitting pretty close to the maximum value. And these are also very highly competitive overall for getting that maximum rabies value. Faster run walk is also another good stat. On both shape-shifting skillers and these 4% poison skill damage large terms. Of course, find the combination that works best with for you overall in terms of shape-shifting skillers and max damage. Overall, more of the max damage large terms will get you slightly higher damage, but these will provide you with slightly lower damage, but also with a ton of extra HP and survivability. I think overall the shape-shifting skillers tend to win out in this build, but it's a combination is very nice. Then of course we have the good torch, we have the +2 skill Annie. Of course, Annie is up to affordability. You know, all this stuff is extra to some degree. Of course, getting a lot of vitality and res on it, and then just life, res, charms. Of course, you can put more MF down there as well. MF res and things of that nature. Alright, so I think we pretty much went over everything we're going to want to go over gear-wise. So now it is time to start demoing various areas. So what we're going to do here first, there's a lot of areas he can do in LOD content, but his LOD content clears pretty absurd with this much damage. But I'll just show off some areas that he can be good at. So he can be really good at the pit, but we'll show off Travancle and Chaos, which he's also extremely strong at as well. Even without amazing good gear, you can use pretty decent gear to clear these areas very effectively. So as you can see, just make sure we're bowed. Make sure we put all those summons out as I described earlier. And just start biting them and they die. You know, it doesn't take very long. It's pretty simple. Okay, there's a Trav run. Very simple stuff. Alright. And after this Chaos demo here, we'll start demoing maps to show you what he can really do. We'll actually only demo tier 3 maps on this character, but he can do almost any map with this level of negative enemy res between the poison creepers, the lower resist from the mercenary, and the facets on my gear. As you can see, even those blood maggots there lose their poison immunity. Poison creepers can break poison immunity, and so can the lower resist from the mercenary's bow. So there aren't a lot of poison immunes we can't break, which means there's almost no map we really can't do with this level of gear. But overall, you're going to want to, maybe with lesser gear or with maybe like not lower resist on your mercenary, you might want to avoid maps with poison immunes. And of course on my filter it will show you like if the map has poison immunes on it. This one does not. This one says fire, cold, physical. That one says fire, immunity says none. My filter, once again, is ADEB-DH on the launcher. A lot of people ask about that in the comments constantly, so I want to make sure we bring that up here again. Alright, so looks like someone wants to trade there, but we're going to be focusing on this guide video here. What's a dexterity traps run? Okay. As you can see, the real key of this character is just running in between packs, biting one monster from that pack, and then running to the next pack. And then also make sure to maintain maximum stacks of Pharaoh Rage. So Pharaoh Rage, as you can see here, will stack up multiple times, and then we'll get more melee splash, run walk, and life leech. Sometimes Rabies doesn't hit. Most of the time it will though. And you can trust it. Alright, Diablo. No problem. Now, against Diablo, since he's a Did I spawn him? Yeah, I was gonna say. You can also use Fury as well. And in between casts of Rabies, as long as you see that like red aura effect, the Rabies is active, you can use Fury with Grief to do additional damage. This is definitely one of Grief's strong points. Alright. So, that's pretty much it. I mean, I think you guys get the idea. His damage is absolutely absurd, and LOD content stands no chance, even with like half this amount of damage, honestly. This damage is crazy. But even with the damage nerf, because of the quality of life buffs this season, this build is, and of course these guides, like most of my guides, even from Season 2, will maintain relevance for many seasons to come, I am sure. Alright. So, we got 3 tier 3 maps here. 3 tier 3 maps. So, these maps are very strong. Now you might be asking, can Rabies only do maps? No, it is also a very strong D-clone killing build. Can also potentially kill Rathma with it, and of course, you can also do Uber Ancients without too much difficulty too, especially with more of a hybrid Grief approach using the physical and poison damage, alternating between Feral Rage and Fury and Rabies. Alright, however, most of the time we're actually going to be using this, because this thing has crazy damage. Now let's talk about, before we actually make a map, what kind of maps are you looking for on a Rabies Druid? Fortified is a thing in the Fortified Season 6 season, however, I wouldn't totally recommend it, as you'll be running a lot to get to additional packs. Monsters tend to be a lot more spread out, and packs tend to be more spread out, because the density is cut in half. It does so much damage, though, that you can kill the elite packs, even in a fortified double health map, very quickly. So you could do it, but I don't think it makes the best use of his strength. Best use of his strength is how fast and effectively Rabies spreads between nearby monsters, so high density is typically going to be the biggest thing you're going to be looking for on any map on this particular build. Of course, taking advantage of rarity and density is even better. However, having the density, or cutting the density in half on a fortified map, doesn't particularly make use of this build strength quite as effectively, so I don't totally recommend it. At any rate, we have 3 maps here with 200 plus density, and if we use the Worldstone shards on them, we can get even higher, most likely. We'll see here. If not, though, they'll still make for good demos, just to show how powerful this build can be. Oh, that one just got nuked. Oh, this one already has a corruption. Okay, and nice. We got even more density on the Blood Moon map. Alright, so first off, there's a lot of very strong tier 3s for a Poison Druid or any poison build in general. I would say Sewers is very strong, River of Blood is very strong, but the very strongest maps I feel like on this character are Pandemonium Citadel, which isn't strong for a lot of builds because it has a lot of very tough immunities. However, it is very strong for this particular build. Throne of Insanity and Blood Moon. So I'll be demoing these maps here particularly. And remember, density really is the key stat for the most part, with rarity to follow. Of course, if you're going for experience in solo or group maps, you can prioritize that, or Magic Find if you're prioritizing that as well. But that's really going to be the key on this particular character. Alright, so let's do some demos here. Let's show off what this character can really do. Insanely tanky, insanely powerful, insane damage. It's even useful in dungeons as a very significant source of poison damage against monsters that aren't immune to poison. So, it's always going to be a beast. Alright, so first off, let's show off what I'd consider to be maybe his number 3 map. But all of these maps you can clear insanely fast with no difficulty. Alright, let's pretend we already casted them all. We already have them casted. Let's go. Power up that Feral Rage, not on Fury. Did it on accident. And there you go. The thing is, with all this damage on Plague Bearer, it kills things insanely fast. It's very, very effective stuff here. You can see the Vigor Aura from the Mercenary really, combined with the Feral Rage, really makes this build insanely fast. We can really move in between packs, and we can spread our infection as fast and as quickly as possible. COVID could only dream of being this effective at spreading. Not quite that. It's pretty effective, but nothing beats Rabies on D2. Alright, here we go here. So one thing to note is my wolves are dead, but they did survive all the way through the beginning of the map and through some of the most tender parts of the map. And the monsters are the strongest, most dangerous. This boss is particularly annoying. Now notice that I don't really need grief. I do so much damage because of all the negative enemy res I have. I could just poison her to death. Use Feral Rage or Fury here and there. And then kill her. She actually didn't even cast the most annoying ability though, so that's pretty nice. But as you can see here, very, very strong skill. I didn't even have to bust out the grief, and she still kills bosses very fast. But you could kill them even faster with the grief, for sure. I'll show it against them. Oh, we're not on Feral Rage, we're on Fury on accident. Okay, here we go. So like I said, you know, all the mobility is built into the kit. I do recommend at least keeping the bear out at all times, because the Mercenary will sometimes get surrounded and die if you do not. I think the hardest part about this build is finding time to pick up the items. Because so many monsters die so quickly. Make sure to keep your bow up. This is a very difficult tier 3 map though, once again. Definitely an exemplar of very high damage. Of course, the next map we're going to do, Throne of Insanity, has some maximum life, so you can really start to see how much damage this actually is. You'll notice no matter what the monster is, as long as it's not a boss, it pretty much dies in one cast of Rabies. You don't need to go back for seconds as long as your damage is anywhere near as high as mine. Of course, we could even swap here to Grief, and you can see, even with only 62k versus 87k, Grief is still very good. And one thing you can see different about the Grief is the Grief is attacking very fast. This is one of the reasons why I'd say a lot of people prefer Grief on this build. Is because the transitions are even smoother, especially with all the block rate that I have. You'll notice that Grief is still just as effective in P1. Of course, Grief has more negative enemy poison res. You'll also notice that the sustain is wild on the Grief, and I pretty much don't take any damage while using it. Plague Bearer is definitely really insane, and it's very effective against a lot of situations, though. And it's going to be better in group mapping scenarios because you'll actually need the full extent of his damage. I think in future seasons, though, Plague Bearer will go back to being the definitive best in slot, though, as you will actually need more damage, and the damage itself most likely gets nerfed. I'd be very surprised if they remove the quality of life they added, because it makes the ability feel better. Removing some damage, though, definitely possible. See, as you can see here, another reason why people really like the Grief is you can see I have almost 10,000 damage too with Feral Rage. Single targets just die. But you know, if I go back to the Plague Bearer, you'll see that it really isn't that much slower. So there really is a debate in the community currently whether, you know, use one or the other. I would say overall having a 4-socketed corrupted Plague Bearer, or at least a 3-socketed one, can rival a Grief. If you have something lesser than that, Grief is probably just straight up better. But yeah, as you can see, it doesn't really matter whether I use the Grief or the Plague Bearer. In group map situations, definitely prefer the Plague Bearer because they can do a lot more damage. In dungeons, it's kind of debatable. I think I might actually prefer the Grief in dungeons because there's more poison amines that you can't break. And the Grief actually allows you to do some sizable damage to them. It does depend on what you're actually facing at the time in the particular dungeon. When I say dungeon, by the way, I mean tier 4 map, something that requires a group to clear, but this is a pretty solid build that can be used for that. Gotta watch those Bloodbringers, though. Even with this much HP, they could potentially one-shot you. This much HP and DR, so it's pretty nasty stuff. As you can see, though, one advantage of the Plague Bearer, though, since it does significantly more sheet damage, it is killing the monsters faster, which means they have less time to do damage to me as well. So, once again, there's that. Of course, the transitions are smoother with the Grief. Definitely a bit of a toss-up there, but that's okay. I can hardly detect any kind of a difference, but I can detect it. It's just very small. They're both insanely solid weapons for different situations. Alright, so that map got absolutely melted. As you can see, you'll have no problem once you get solid here melting maps in their entirety. You don't need this crazy caliber of gear to do it either. As you can see, my damage is very much in excess. Especially in Players 1. In higher player count, it's not in excess anymore. You really want to pump it up as high as possible. Alright, so what we're going to do next is we're going to go demo this Throne of Insanity with more maximum life. We'll demo it once again. We'll swap between the Grief and this thing. We're not going to swap between these. I just had these just to show that they can be used. Very nice stuff. Right. Okay. Good. Alright, I probably left a bunch of items on the ground, but it's just how she goes with this build sometimes. And also, it's really late in the season, and honestly, with our caliber of gear on both the Druid and the Barb, you can probably agree that we don't really have to do too much trading or item finding really more at this moment. In future seasons, of course, they plan to do even more builds or even redo builds that have been significantly changed in previous seasons. But it's always a good time. Alright, so... Oh, interesting. We lost our vines somehow. Oh, I just didn't... Okay, I didn't spawn them. Okay. That's right, this is a new game. Okay, so... Let's say, how do you lose the vines? You can't lose the vines. So once again, bite, 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 missed bite, 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 bite. You kind of just want to run around and bite packs, and you want to spread out your bites so that the damage really is as complete and powerful as possible. It's really going to get you those crazy map times. Rabies this season is almost cheating when you have this level of power. Spread speed is really a sight to behold. Of course, if you want, you can get the stragglers. So you can swap to the Grief. Grief does have 5 more negative enemy res, but it has 25k less sheet damage, though. You can see, though, with Grief, though, it's very fast. You can see with Grief, Grief is very strong. Okay. So yeah, it's pretty nuts. By the way. Oh man, people are trying to trade me like crazy. There you go. Yeah, you can see though the spread. The damage is a bit higher on the Plague Bearer, though. And the monsters die almost instantaneously, but I hit them a bit slower. It's so imperceptible, though, because you just do so much damage on this build. It's very hard to tell. Hello? Summon the bear? I think I was being put in block animation there. So even with 86 faster block rate, you can still feel block. I really like that high block rate. You can see the sustain is still very high on the Plague Bearer, but no. Offensive GC? That's probably not that interesting. No! Yeah, the Mercenary is gonna die. Switch back to the Grief actually and go show off how it works against the boss here. If I can find where he is. Oh, okay. You can see Fury's a lot more effective with the Grief. There you go. Well, that was weird. He dropped nothing that the loot filter could detect? Wow, okay. Garbage. True. Garbage. Try to not let your feral rage go out if possible. I wouldn't say I'm always the best at this though. You can see the lower resist isn't really all that effective on the Act 1 Mercenary, which is why I mentioned those other Mercenary options, at least in P1, but the Vigor Aura really is effective, so it still does something, but you'll notice that the Mercenary most of the time isn't actually helping out with the damage. Not really that necessary. It's up to you if you think the extra attack speed is worth it. I personally think it is. But it's easier to get higher DR using the other mercenaries. It's definitely a lot of different things you can do. A lot more, the more defensive options on the Act 2 mercenary definitely seem pretty solid though. You'll notice though that the mercenary is keeping up with me though, and the lower resist is helping a lot here and there. It's still using the grief, of course. See, the monsters are dying a little bit slower with the grief. But it's not huge. Yeah, the main problem is going back for the items and picking them up. Just yeah, it just spreads everywhere, it's crazy. Yeah, you just want to go find the other pack as soon as possible. Get all the monsters. Okay, Pus Spitter. Cool, that could be good. Plus skills on Pus Spitter is totally inconsequential in this particular build. One thing to note is you could also potentially use the Pus Spitter itself as a two-handed option on this character, and you can actually cast the lower resist as well. So that's like really the only two-handed option I'd even consider early game. But you really gotta watch yourself, because without a shield, you're pretty vulnerable in this particular build. So you gotta really watch archers and things like that. Okay. Bam. Believe it or not, the Throne of Insanity is over as soon as it starts. You're going to be hitting 6-minute map times easily, and that's with item pickup with this particular build. It's kind of nuts. Out of control stuff here. Alright, and so we're going to do one more demo, and arguably his strongest map, which is a lot of builds' strongest maps, but he is one of the strongest builds in this ultimate item drop map. The Blood Moon, the Cow map, the OP. This map, this build really starts to look ridiculous. This is a particularly good stats to show it off in because there's no maximum life. So I'm probably just going to run between packs as fast as possible because I don't think we're going to need the extra damage in here. And we'll show you guys what this boy is truly capable of. And let me know in the comments below whether you think he's a good dog or a bad dog. A bad boy, good boy, medium boy, I don't know. Alright, anyway, let's do it. So, want a bow, turn into a wolf. You can always resummon these other wolves, by the way. I don't typically bother because I don't need to, but I feel like you don't have the survivability and whatnot. It's pretty good. So, as you can see here, the damage, even with the grief, is absolutely out of control. If you have maximum life cows, you're probably going to want to beef up that damage as much as possible. And with really high density in here, you can really take advantage just how fast you can absolutely shred this map. that. Sometimes I'm just really bad at keeping my feral rage up. You know, there's even a buff timer down there, and forget about it. One thing to note is that in group maps, I've seen the DPS on Rabies get to as high as 350k with the Plague Bearer. This is pretty nuts. Of course, the solo mapping, pretty hard to show it quite as high. Let me see if I can actually show you guys just how much damage we're doing here. I've seen it get to as high as 350k though in that particular situation. You can see it's the main problem here is that they die so fast in players 1. Can't see it. Yeah, but anyway, try it out in a group map and let me know how high your damage was able to get to. I've seen some pretty crazy numbers from myself and others. Yeah, it just spreads and kills everything way too quickly. As you can see though, the Plague Bearer, you can kind of tell a bit the difference between Plague Bearer and Grief here. You can definitely see that when I'm using the Plague Bearer, like right now. The damage is a bit more extreme on the Plague Bearer. So when you're doing group maps and have higher maximum life, you're definitely going to want to use the Plague Bearer almost all the time. Hey, what do you know? Another Blood Moon map. Perfect. Just what this character always needs. Yeah, it's pretty nuts. There aren't many builds that can clear cows as fast as this. It's absolutely bonkers clear speed. And you got the Warcry bar clocking pretty high there, but ultimately it's let's see with Grief though, there is a distinct advantage here. Oh, excuse me. Yeah. It is a distinct advantage, but it's not very large. Yeah, so we went back to the Grief here. As you can see, just slapping on a Grief is a super effective method. No crazy corruptions required. Gotta watch out. You might be pretty tanky on this build, but try not to get yourself pinned down. Of course, that can be hard sometimes, but that is why we have maximum block and we have DR and whatnot. If you do get yourself pinned down while running around in between packs, it's very easy to kill everything. Alright, rebow. Keeping up that bow is key. As you can see, the Grief is perfectly sufficient. Bite him through the gate. Pro tips. Get Dark Humility. Look at that. Bam! Yeah, so you can see I'm using the movement. Bite, 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 bite. Now, as you can see there, I can take some damage. I'm very tanky though, which is good. Because if we're amped and they have lots of auras, I have gotten chunked really hard. I don't know if you've seen that here in this demo, but it is possible. Definitely need a lot of survivability, and haven't really seen any ultra dangerous situations though in this particular demo, but that's okay. Makes it look better, right? Negative block maps are definitely not great for this build because you end up taking a lot more damage as well. It can be avoided if you want. Low density, though, is definitely the major thing to avoid, though. It's just not using the strength of this build. The spread is just incredible. You're trying to put crap in the cube. It was full. As you can see with the lower resist, they die pretty much instantaneously on stuff. We summoned exactly one wolf. We can go back to the Plague Bearer if we want here. Really want to show off the incredible clear speed. Oh, hello. Ruby Jewel of Bliss, 10 minimum damage, 33 ED Jewel. That's pretty good. It's pretty damn good. Where's our Feral Rage at? Oh, I'm on Fury. Yeah, sometimes I'm not good at watching that. Don't be afraid to run through the monsters, by the way. You know, even on hardcore, for the most part, you can just run through them. One thing to note that you don't actually lose your block like on normal Diablo 2 when you run. So you lose 2/3 of your block percent when you're running in Diablo 2 and LOD and D2R. It's actually not the case on PD2, so this build will never suffer from that particular problem. Don't have to worry about running through the monsters. Alright, there you have it. Maybe a little slow, but with item pickup, pretty solid. I think we're hitting around like what, 7-8 minutes there. 420 modeled rip. You can really see just how ridiculous this build truly can be. Pretty incredible stuff, right? This is monstrous build, and I expect it to be relevant for pretty much every future season to come. Nasty stuff, you can use it for virtually all endgame content. Very cool. Looks like the Mercenary got stuck somehow, so we couldn't pick anything up. That's interesting. But yeah, he's a beast. Hydrophobia. Definitely check him out. S tier build this season, one of the very fastest overall mappers in tier 3 maps. Monstrous in group maps and dungeons, can clear the hardest endgame bosses as well. Very insane stuff. Rabies is definitely a good time. Of course, for those, you're going to need maximum res, and there's definitely a lot of other gear swap outs that you can do, such as Sorb and maximum res. You can even use things like Spirit Keeper if you want both spirits up for even more support potential as well. There's definitely a lot of things that I don't always mention every single item, but we will indeed put every section of this guide in the timestamps below so you guys can access whatever part's most interesting to you. Remember to check out our guides. Once again, this is yet another installment of our PD2 guide series, and for Season 6, But guides, even as far back as for Season 2, are often extremely relevant, maybe with a few item swap outs and maybe a couple of small skill tweaks here and there. But overall, I hope you guys learned a lot in this guide. GG. He is an absolute monster, and we'll definitely see you guys with more build guides and a new tier list we plan for next seasons. Hope you guys are looking forward to that. At any rate, you guys can catch us live for more PD2 and LOD content at twitch.tv/Dark Humility. Let's get it. Over and out. Dark Humility. See you guys next time.